This is the running order.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming for this, the last of the CSJ's events for today. We do have a busy program at the conference and more events coming up tomorrow. But we're really delighted to be here talking about how housing providers and the role of housing can strengthen the social fabric in local communities across the country. And just to begin thinking about this topic, perhaps we might start in a slightly unconventional way with a moment of reflecting in a very busy conference schedule. And I thought it might be helpful just to think for a moment about a difficult time that we went through in life. What happened in that time? Where did we turn to? I think for many of us, we'd have turned to friends, relatives, people who are close to us for social support. And those relationships are so important to so many of us. But it's also true that loneliness and social isolation are issues that are increasingly on the map as serious social problems and indeed health problems in the UK today and in many Western societies around the world. And so it's ever more important that we look at this issue of strong local communities and social fabric as not just fluffy subjects, but serious health and social challenges in this day and age. And that's especially dear to our hearts at the CSJ, a think tank which is focused on poverty and social disadvantage. Recent research by DCMS from last year consistently found that the lower someone's income, the higher their odds of being lonely and socially isolated. So we can imagine how hard it is for those going through tough times in life where that kind of social, relational support is thin on the ground. And we should ask what kinds of stakeholders are available to provide social support and strengthen social fabric in communities across the country. And one often forgotten crucial stakeholder in many communities is a housing provider, housing association, or a local authority. And that's what we're talking about today, often a forgotten side of what housing is all about. So I'm delighted to be joined by a wonderful panel to talk about this really important subject. To my left just here is Housing and Planning Minister Rachel Maclean MP, also MP for Redditch. Just to my right is CJ Bowery, founder of Sal Shoes, works very closely with Guinness Housing Association, which is one of the largest housing associations in the country. Representing Guinness is Kevin Williams, who's a Group Director of Development and Commercial Services. And Kevin and Guinness look after 64,000 homes across the country. So huge responsibility in looking after tenants and local communities. And finally, Liam Halligan, who is an economist, an economics and business editor of GB News, a regular columnist at The Telegraph, and has also written a really important book on housing, Home Truths, which came out a couple of years ago and is highly recommended reading in this area as well. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Rachel to make some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the panel, and it's lovely to be here. And at the risk of boring Liam, we've just shared a panel next door. I'm going to start with exactly
She ignores me for years and then she follows me around.
I know, yeah, there you go. I'm a fan of Liam, having read his book when I was first appointed into the role. Actually, the day I was appointed into the role, I went into the Secretary of State's office, Michael Gove, and he said, read this book, and it was your book. So I did that on day one, night one. So there's a lot of what Liam said, which is actually very relevant to what we're doing. However, what you're talking about here is social justice. So I come back to the role of housing in that vital mission of social justice. Of course, we know that the platform for people to build a life, to get a good job, to raise a family, to achieve their human potential, whatever that might be, relies on them having a decent home, a safe home. And that is a core part of our Conservative mission as a party. Of course, there are all sorts of problems around the housing market at the moment, but we have to go back to everything has to start with housing supply. Absolutely everything relies on us building enough houses, which we haven't been doing, even though actually in the grand scheme of things, we haven't been doing too badly. Over the last, if you look at the sort of record of delivery over the last 30 years, the most housing delivery we've had has come in the last 5 years. We've had sort of 3 very good years of housing delivery. It's not enough. I'm not saying at all that it's enough, but we've had some small successes. So we need to obviously learn from that and build on it and do better across the piece. And why is that important for social housing? Because clearly we're talking about supply. We're talking about that overall housing target, which we are committed to. We do need to find ways to deliver that across the country, make sure local authorities do it. But we will not be able to build social housing and affordable housing without building more housing overall. It is a fact, and a lot of research will back this up, that if more housing overall is delivered by the private sector of any tenure, that by definition makes housing in a local area more affordable because it's supply and demand. So we do need to see that combination of the private sector with private capital, developers coming in, that then stimulates the market, that stimulates those Section 106 contributions. But that's not enough. We also need the government to step in. That's why we have the Affordable Homes Programme, the Shared Ownership Programme. I can see many people in this room who are delivering some of those programmes and doing it extremely well and really developing amazing places and doing a fantastic job for their residents. And, you know, we work very much in partnership with registered social landlords and housing providers, delivering all sorts of different models, whether it's shared ownership or first homes or some of the other smaller projects that they're delivering, and really working very innovatively. But there's always scope to do more, to improve. My job is a massive job. I have obviously the whole responsibility for the whole planning system, and I can't believe we'll go through one fringe without talking about planning. So we are obviously determined to reform the planning system to deal with a lot of the problems that people are highlighting to me. We're doing all that work now. It started a few years ago. It's coming back to Parliament through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. That's aiming to speed up and simplify the planning system, and also to enable that land value uplift to be captured and actually spent in local communities on affordable housing, and that upfront infrastructure, which we know again is a sticking point why a lot of local communities are sort of up in arms against any development in their area. So a huge amount I could talk about, but I'll kind of leave it there because I'm sure we're going to have loads of questions.
Thanks, Rachel, and it's wonderful to hear about all you're doing in planning, housing, placemaking, and of course there are the bricks and mortar of bringing housing supply into our housing ecosystem, those much needed homes. We also know that housing about more than just homes, just supply. And I'm going to turn to Kevin now. Perhaps you could tell us about what it looks like to be a placemaker in the homes and communities that you serve.
Yeah, no, thank you, Minister, and thank you to the CSJ, who we're really pleased to be partnering with today. And I hope this is an enlightening and constructive debate. So as Sam said, Guinness Partnership is one of the largest and oldest housing associations in the country. Our fundamental purpose when we were founded in 1890 is very similar to what it is today, and that's to provide good quality, affordable housing to people and to improve people's lives and create possibilities for them. Our commitment to local communities means that our guiding social purpose goes beyond bricks and mortar and the provision of care services, and this is really what's at the heart of what we mean at Guinness when we talk about social investment. We think it means activities and programmes designed to strengthen people's skills and capacities, such as helping them to find work, to start a business, or boost their career with qualifications and training. It means being there for those who live in our homes and communities by providing support when they need it most to help alleviate acute hardship, in particular over the last few years. Last year, Guinness was really proud to have invested £2.8 million through a combination of direct and partnership activities with over 50 local organisations, both big and small, to help strengthen the social fabric of our communities. And this investment benefited nearly 16,000 Guinness residents and over 28,000 people in the wider local communities that we work. And I'd just like to give you a couple of examples. we partnered with Women into Construction to support women to gain skills, qualifications and work placements on our construction sites in Bristol and London. We provided business support and mentoring to resident entrepreneurs to support them to make their business ideas a reality. And one of our proudest achievements, which is just on the pop-up behind us, we refurbished a historic Guinness building to provide an inclusive community space at the Hackney Family Centre. And this really helps to improve social cohesion, it reduces socialisation and improves well-being. And we're really proud to have played our role in enabling 360 families to access services that support local families, in particular those with babies and young children, just within the first year of operation. So they're just a few of the examples that we're really proud to be involved in. But of course, I have to mention our fantastic work with Sal's Shoes. I'm delighted to be sharing the panel today with the inspirational founder of this amazing charity, CJ, who you'll hear from in a bit. But in terms of why Beyond Bricks and Mortar is important to housing associations and to Guinness, we're often referred to as anchor institutions as housing associations. We're in it for the long term. We invest in communities and then we stay there. We're anchored to place and we place the people that live in them. And every pound that we earn is invested in delivering new homes, improving existing homes, improving our services and supporting the local community. It's got harder and harder to do this over the last few years, that's absolutely true, but we won't ever shy away from our responsibility. As we've seen, parts of society, local and national bodies begin to withdraw, often due to cost pressures. We think it's more important than ever that housing associations remain on the pitch, and we absolutely will remain on the pitch. But I'm also acutely conscious that the spotlight's been on the sector in recent years, and rightly so. Last year, Guinness invested over £177 million in our existing homes. And this is consistent with the wider sector, where, again, last year, housing associations combined invested a record £6.5 billion on maintaining and repairing our existing homes. And we're deeply committed to improving our homes and services, and we strongly support the outcomes of the Better Social Housing Review and the Social Housing Regulation Act. But we also remain really conscious that we need to build more homes. We do continue to have a housing crisis, and as the Minister said, for many, many years we've not built sufficient homes, and I suspect Liam will be able to say a word or two about this shortly. Guinness is proud to be a partner, a strategic partner with Homes England and the GLA, and will be delivering 5,500 new homes by March 2025. But the current environment makes this incredibly challenging. We've seen real-time inflation in the construction industry of 22% over the last few years. That's making development harder than it's ever been, certainly in my career. And as society's ability to deliver the sort of support that strengthens the social fabric of our nation has waned in recent years, housing associations need to be there, and we will be there. And partnership is an absolute key way that we're going to do that, both with people like CJ, but also with the government.
Thanks very much, Kevin. And without further ado, that's a perfect intro to CJ. Could you tell us about how you work with Guinness and the work of Sal's Shoes?
Yeah, my intro is going to sound very random after all this housing thing. Kids tend to outgrow their shoes before they outwear them, and shoes are relatively difficult to recycle because of all the different components they're made up of. So just over 10 years ago, I had accumulated a bag full of my son Sal's outgrown shoes. There are millions of children around the world who cannot afford footwear. Feet in shoes are protected feet. They are feet protected from injury and infection, and in areas of low sanitation, the spread of infection. I was unable to find a charity that could tell me where my son's shoes would find their new owners if I donated them, so I set up Sal's Shoes. We find new feet for pre-loved footwear, and gratefully, increasingly, new footwear from retailers and manufacturers. Fast forward 10 years, we have now distributed over 5 million pairs in 61 countries around the world. We have always worked in the UK on a much smaller scale to begin with, but never more so than in the last few years. So in the last 12 months, we distributed over 150,000 pairs of footwear to children in this country who cannot afford them. Over the summer, we sent out 30,000 pairs of new school shoes and PE trainers, just ready for the return to school in September. 4 years ago, we were contacted by Guinness, which in itself is quite refreshing, a large housing association contacting a small charity. And it had come to their attention that in some of their communities, families were struggling to buy footwear. So they contacted us and asked if there was a way we could work together. And we came up with a concept. I think dignity is one of the most important things to the human spirit. We all make dozens of choices every day, and those choices define us. And I think often when in a position of impoverishment, it's that sense of dignity and those choices that are taken away from you. So we created Sal's Shoes shops in existing community spaces where families in need were already being referred. So there might be a food bank on site or a food pantry or a discount furniture store. And our shoe shops look like a shop and feel like a shop and enjoy families in need to really just enjoy the experience of shopping, but also to retain that sense of dignity and to exercise choice when selecting footwear for their children. In the last 4 years, we've now opened 6 with Guinness. And actually, thanks to their faith in us and their funding, which is always a struggle for small charities, which allowed us to trial something we perhaps wouldn't have done without that security. We've now also opened 5 independently. So there are now 11 Sal Shoe shops nationwide, and we continue to work with partner organisations who distribute our shoes. So we work with other housing associations, we work with social services, we work with domestic violence refuges, we work with schools, we work with refugee centres. Everyone needs shoes.
Thanks very much, CJ. Last but by no means least, Liam.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I'm a big fan of the CSJ. I think, unlike most think tanks, they actually get out of zone one. They have tremendous contacts around the country, and I appreciate being associated with them. I'm also a big fan of Guinness and other housing associations and third sector providers of homes. They do a great deal of work plugging at least some of the huge gaps in our housing provision. So today's young adults spend a higher share of their incomes and are less likely to own their own home than any generation since the 1930s. So we built 3.1 million homes in the UK in the 60s, and since then that number's gone down steadily to just 1.1 million during the 10 years from 2010, lagging well behind population growth. And that's why we have such an affordability crisis. France and Germany have 580 and 520 dwellings per 1,000 people respectively. The UK has barely 400. That is the problem that we face. And that explains why house prices in the UK have surged over 400% in income adjusted terms since 1970, compared to 180% in France and just 50% in Germany. All that's fantastic news, of course, if your family owns property and has done for generations. It's ghastly, it's deeply dispiriting, it's totally unjust if you're starting with little or no financial stake in society and you can't get a financial stake in society, however hard and long you are prepared to work. We've seen slight price falls in recent months, of course, but the average UK home still costs 8 to 10 times the average annual income. When I bought my first property in London in the mid-90s, it was 4 times, and 4 times is the long-term historic average. I've done long-term calculations. The last time house price to earnings ratio was above 8 was in the 1880s. So we are literally back in Victorian era levels of affordability for ordinary people. That's why owner occupancy has plunged among 25 to 34-year-olds from 70% in the mid-90s to less than 40% now. That's right, over half a generation are being locked out of home ownership at that crucial family-forming age. The private rental sector, meanwhile, has doubled from 10 to 20%, with rents soaring, again, reflecting the serious lack of homes. And the severe lack of social housing too. I know this is a subject close to the Guinness's heart and other housing associations' hearts. Millions live in often substandard, heavily subsidised rentals, pushing the housing benefit bill to around £25 billion a year, dead money, state money, taxpayers' money, being used not to build homes that can go on the state's balance sheet as an asset. They're being used to build the buy-to-let empires of too often unscrupulous social landlords. And of course, successive governments have failed badly in this area. There's little recognition among MPs, as I said in a previous Fringe meeting, that the Greenbelt, far from being concreted over, has more than doubled in size in the last 40 years. If you don't believe that statistic, it's very, very closely sourced and referenced in my book, Home Truths. The Greenbelt now covers 13% of England's landmass, again, having doubled in size over the last 40 years. Residential property, including gardens, account for less than 2%. Yeah, let that sink in. Now, many claim a lack of planning permission is the reason for a lack of homes. It's not true. 4 out of 5 planning applications are accepted. There are over 1.4 million planning permissions outstanding. In London, 40% of planning permissions granted are never actually built. So rather than a lack of permissions, the real problem, as I show in my book, is the ever-lengthening delay between permissions being granted and homes actually being built. Big developers hoover up the planning permissions, they sit on them, they then drip feed supply into the market. The resulting supply shortage leads to pent-up demand, keeps prices rising, so developers make higher profits overall by building fewer homes. Before the 2008 financial crisis, numerous small and medium-sized builders built around 3/4 of our homes. Small firms build quickly. When they get the planning permission, they build immediately. They need the cash flow. They haven't got the deep pockets. But numerous SMEs were wiped out, of course, in the financial crisis. They haven't come back. Even by 2016, a House of Lords inquiry into our house building sector said it had all the characteristics of an oligopoly. Since then, the big players have become even more dominant. I'm glad, as I recommended in Home Truths, that the CMA is now finally looking at our house building sector. There are clear, they will deny them, there are clear signs of restrictive practices. How can you make a 25 or 30% margin using a Victorian technology building homes? It's complete madness. We need radical supply side reform. We need to make sure planning permissions granted are built out relatively quickly into saleable homes. A permission shouldn't be seen as an option to build if you fancy it, or maybe you just want to sit on the permission to stop someone else building it. A permission should be a two-way obligation. If you haven't built out a saleable home within 2 years, you start paying council tax. If you haven't built out a saleable home after 3 years, double the council tax. You must align the incentives of the big builders and ordinary people, given the public good that is that planning permission. It's literally a license to print money. The final thing I'll say for now is that the real nub of why we have too few homes is our opaque, deeply dysfunctional land market. When residential permissions are granted, land values can rocket many hundredfold. That vast planning uplift, often many, many millions of pounds, going almost entirely to landowners, developers and intermediate, shadowy land agents. My book argues that that uplift should be shared at source 50-50 with local authorities. That would dampen price speculation, you'd get cheaper land and in turn more affordable, better quality homes. This land value capture mechanism would also generate significant funds to build schools, hospitals and other infrastructure as the housing is being built, making new developments more popular, countering NIMBY arguments, transforming the often fraught local politics of planning. Many, many countries in the world use land value capture in this way, from Singapore to Hong Kong, to states in America, to Australia, to Germany, to the Netherlands. We are a complete outlier with this feudal system where the whole of the uplift goes to landowners. It's good for yacht sales and the production of cocaine addicts, third generation farmers, but it's absolutely terrible for ordinary people who want to buy a home. Another quicker fix is to make better use of state-owned land. Some 6% of the UK's freehold acreage, almost 1 million hectares, including countless urban sites primed for development, is owned by the state. If the state sold or leased just 1/20th of its land for development, just 1/20th, that would facilitate over 2 million homes, far more if urban sites are used where building densities are higher. Sales of land should be restricted to small local builders and include strict conditions relating to build-out pace and affordable and social housing permission. So in sum, presented in the right way, this great British land sell-off would appeal to both centre-left, boosting the supply of affordable and social housing, and the centre-right, helping to boost home ownership and a notionally smaller state. The UK's chronic housing shortage, it's a cross-party problem, it's decades in the making. We need cross-party solutions to solve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our panellists for those really stimulating opening remarks. I might come to yourself, Rachel, to begin with the first question and exercise some chair's prerogative. I'd love to hear your vision for the role of social housing in the housing system, and in particular, what distinctive roles, in addition to supply, do you think social housing providers can and should provide in the areas that they serve?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, look, this government is absolutely, you know, we value the role of social landlords, housing associations, such as the work that Kevin does. We value it because it's the right thing to do and it has such a huge impact on people's lives in communities. It provides that stability for people to build a life, to actually harness the opportunities that they have in front of them. And of course, it is the number one thing that's actually helping people to stabilise lives and alleviate poverty or deprivation or any of the other issues that people may experience through no fault of their own, just through being born into a situation that's extremely difficult for them and be disadvantaged and not have a stable upbringing. Like that's what we want for people. So it has a massive knock-on impact, not only onto poverty and sort of income and job opportunities, but also health. As I think it's completely right to say, the health outcomes in terms of people's not only physical but mental health, living in poor housing, unstable housing, it has wider impacts across the whole of the public sector. And of course, the public purse then has to pick that up in terms of physical health, impacts on the NHS, and impacts on mental health and well-being. It's sometimes hard to quantify all of those because it's not easy to quantify it. But we know that if people are living in a stable situation, with security, in a warm home, where they can actually afford and not stressed by paying their bills, they're going to be less likely to need to go and see a GP about all these other issues. They're going to be more likely to be able to take a job opportunity, to work, to contribute, to bring up a family. It's just everything starts with housing, basically. So it's so key that we do continue these partnerships. I can see lots of people in this room who are sort of nodding because we've had these conversations on multiple occasions, and we're working really closely with the sector because I think the sector's recognised that there are some things they need to do better. There have been some problems in the sector. We've worked closely with them, not just myself, but many other ministers and the department as a whole, to bring in more regulation to raise the standards across the board, you know, on the back of the horrendous situation and the death of our Bishak and that scenario. And that was just shocking in our country today. It shouldn't happen, but the sector have come to the table, accepted the need for legislation, accepted the work to professionalise the standards in their own sector. I think there's more work to do, as there always is, but I think that, you know, the direction of travel is there. And we need this sector, this particular model of housing delivery. As I said before, the Section 106 is never going to be the whole solution. We need to be able to fund, you know, the registered social landlords, the housing associations who often have very, very long-term time horizons and are able to make much longer-term strategic decisions about this housing infrastructure. And, you know, housing is part of our national infrastructure, and that's how we need to look at it. And that's how this sector can work with us. I mean, obviously, we'd all love to take the politics out of housing. I mean, I wish we could. You know, we've all got magic wands, maybe, but I just don't think it's actually going to happen. But we need to work, you know, with these institutions that are part of the fabric of our society, extremely valued parts of our society. And I think it's right that we continue to do that.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful for opening up the conversation. We'll open up to Q&A just now. Please, could I ask that questions are brief and are indeed questions? And we'll start with Kate back there.
Hi, very nice to see you. I'm Kate from the National Housing Federation. So a question for the Minister. It was great to hear your articulation of the value of social housing there. That's so positive. It's a question about regeneration. It was really good to get welcome changes to the Affordable Homes programme recently that enables that funding to go towards regenerating homes as well as just building new ones. And I was just wondering about your vision for that going forward, how it links to levelling up, and also there's quite a tight deadline of being on site by March 25 and whether we could expect to see regeneration funding beyond that deadline.
you want to say more than, do you want to just me to respond?
Initially we'll do that, and then.
Okay.
And then
Yes, I mean, look, thank you. Your advocacy and that of the people that you represent has been essential in, I think, the government and our department taking that decision and making the case to the Treasury. We recognise the benefits because obviously it used to be that it was all about additionality, and because we know that actually if you're able to regenerate those homes, it's going to have a really beneficial impact in terms of your ability to sort of balance your own books and also have better outcomes for your tenants. I mean, look, we're always pragmatic in government. We recognise there's pressures outside of our control and your control. We want to bring forward certainty. We want to get that money where it's needed so that you can start to do the work. But we'll always continue to have those discussions so that we get the outcomes that we want.
Thank you very much. Yes, over here.
Thank you. I have a question.
So wait for the microphone.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm Bartek from Bright Blue. I have a question for Liam, actually. I'm a big fan of your book, but I'm going to play a bit
I'm
of
not going to tell you what's going on at GB News, sorry. I could.
If I wanted to know, I'd ask somebody else. Yes, I'm going to play a bit of a devil's advocate, and I'm going to defend the developers. One of your big talking points is talking about land banking, and I suppose what they would say in response to you is that build-out rates at large sites naturally take longer, and that they cannot drip-feed the supply because the price of homes is dictated to them by the second-hand market, because the new builds are such a small proportion of the total of the housing market that they could not possibly drip-feed the housing supply. What would you say in response?
Well, as Mandy Rice Davis once said, they would say that, wouldn't they? I'd just like to say the Minister's very kind to me about me, and I'd like to be kind about her, and indeed the Secretary of State. This is a really hard area. I've been following housing for quite a long time. I think I worked out in Home Truths up to that point we'd had 21 housing ministers in 24 years, which is a sign of the lack of priority that political leaders have given this. But I do think you're grappling really hard with these issues. I do think the Secretary of State is. We've got some really good people talking about housing in our public space. On the Labour side, I think John Healy's very knowledgeable. He's so knowledgeable, Starmer took him off the housing brief because he was dangerous. There are many good people trying to work this out, but in the end, it comes down to political will and facing down, I'm afraid, vested interests. Look, not all big developers are bad. I mean, a lot of what I learnt about the housing industry, how it really works, I learnt from developers who were talking to me off the record, or people who had previously worked for big developers. We just need a mixed economy of provision. We need volume house builders if we're going to get anywhere near the number of houses we want to build. But we need those SMEs as well. And they've been totally wiped out, partly because of lack of bank finance, partly because of the way the planning system works. It excludes them. It's so expensive. And the reality is, it's my professional opinion, and if they wanted to sue me, they'd have done so by now, that a lot of our big developers are not actually really developers. They're land speculation companies who build a few homes on the side. So they look honest. That is the reality of the situation. Yes, of course you need a supply of plots, but the numbers are so huge compared to the annual amount of homes that they build. And it's my personal belief, again, they will deny it, Your Honour, that a lot of the big developers are running localised cartels effectively, and Help to Buy made it a lot worse because, 3 of the big developers hoovered up 90% of Help to Buy money, and they ended up knocking out often substandard homes, often without fire safety regulations, often they didn't even get through building regs, to captive young people who had to buy nasty new builds because that was the only way they were going to be able to buy a home under Help to Buy. It's complete madness. And if the government goes for more easy headlines of Help to Buy, I'm going to absolutely monster them publicly because it is not.
We've been warned.
It's not a solution. It is not a solution. All it does is it bolsters the demand juice in the market against a fixed supply, and everyone else who can't access Help to Buy has to end up paying more for their home. So I don't, and then some of the big developers, they start selling homes in the middle of a field on leasehold, and not just leasehold, like really nasty leaseholds with doubling clauses in them that they then sell on to hedge funds. Not me, Gov. I mean, completely insane. I mean, I've reported on families where, homeowners have committed suicide. It's not funny because of what a lot of the big developers have done. Now, there are good developers out there, but there are some who are really not good.
Yeah.
How can you justify, and this is coming from me, a free market guy, I used to be an asset manager for God's sake, how can you justify a company where the chief exec gets a £75 million bonus for building fewer homes than the year before, using basic technology? He's not a tech bro, he hasn't invented anything. It's just completely, if that isn't evidence of restrictive practices, again, they will deny it, Your Honour, if that isn't evidence of restrictive practices, I don't know what is. And let's see what the CMA does. The FSA, or the FCA as we must now learn to call it, certainly came out with a pathetic response on debanking a couple of weeks ago. And again, I wait to see what the CMA actually does. Are they going to have any vim and vigour about this? This really is the everything problem, and the Minister understands that. The Secretary of State understands that. So many of our problems in this country, productivity, crime, stem from a lack of either home ownership or, at the sharp end, social housing.
We'll go to the gentleman at the back here, and we'll start taking questions in pairs. So after that, we'll come to the gentleman in the middle here as well.
Claude Hendrickson. I'm from the Community Self-Build Network and the Community Land Trust Network. I wanted to know how more funding because we've had the Community Housing Fund. We've had the Community Housing Fund stopped, and we need to get that reinstated because the communities want to come to the table to help solve this problem as well. And you've said some fantastic things about how the car developers are holding us to ransom, but we're not even talking about the large sites. There's some pocket sites within communities that communities could take on, community land trusts, co-housing projects, cooperatives, and we want to bring them to the table. And I said in the last meeting I was in, we're looking for Homes England maybe to ring fence funding a percentage of the annual budget for the next 10 years, let's say, so that that sector can grow and actually be engaged, because a lot of the developers build units. A lot of the housing associations, I'm sorry to say, build units. They don't build communities, they don't build community housing, they build units. So really my question is, and I take what you said, Mr. Guinness, you've presented, and I'd like to link with you. I'd like to know how we can get more people, the community, and we will develop more construction skills, enterprise training. It's more holistic, and even if we only get 10% of the market for the next 10 years, can you imagine the impact? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Rachel.
Look, I'm absolutely a massive fan of the community land trust model and community housing trust. And in fact, last week I had quite a few people from your sector come to talk to me. And you're right to say that we did have that grant funding and it ran out. It hasn't been renewed. Confidentially, how confidential, I don't know.
There's no one in the room.
There's no one in the room, so you won't tell anyone. I've been lobbying really hard.
I don't know any journalists.
You don't know any journalists. I've been lobbying really hard to restart that, okay? So I don't know what's in the autumn statement, but I would like that to be in the autumn statement. Now, why do I feel so strongly about that? It sort of links to what some people have been saying about SMEs. I know that it's not necessarily SMEs, but I know that community organisations often work with smaller local builders. They work on smaller sites. And they've had an absolutely torrid time for all sorts of reasons, planning, interest rates, inflation, the economy, pandemic, you name it, everything, it's just going on and on. I feel really strongly about this because I was in business for 30 years before I came into politics. I started and ran my own business. That business went bust. I know what it's like to lose everything, including your home, and have to start all over again. It wasn't in building, but it's still the same thing. So I really get it when SMEs come to me and say, we've been driven out of business, we can't get planning permission, we can't get land, everything. And so I feel very, very strongly about doing more in this. I think we need to look at the sector and intervene to diversify it. Yes, of course, I believe in the free market, of course I do. But at the same time, this is not really a free market. It's a market that's not free. So we absolutely do need to diversify, and this is a time when we do need to take government action to level it up and try and bring more people in. And I think that the Community Housing Trust play a massive part in that. I've seen some fantastic work that's going on. I've seen examples of it. I think it's amazing. I think it's got huge potential, and also it can leapfrog all of the kind of pitchforks that people are going to like take up against the big volume house builders and some of the small ones too. Why? Because they can see it's local people meeting the local need, and it's part of the whole spirit of the place. So I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, and I really am fighting very hard for you with the Treasury. So I'm on it. It's top of my list.
Thank you very much, Minister. And before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to come to Kevin. I know you must have worked perhaps with CLTs and also with developing communities from a built environment perspective. What ingredients go into a really strong community?
Speaking to them and listening is the absolute key. So yes, I've worked with a number of CLT groups. I was thinking actually the first national conference that I ever spoke at was when the Secretary of State was Shadow Housing Minister at the time, and it was a Community Land Trust conference in Coventry, I think it was. So I've been a big advocate of CLTs. They're really, really hard work, as I'm sure you know. Tried to get a few off the ground and they failed, but we did have a really successful one I was involved with probably about 15, 20 years ago in Bolton that worked incredibly well. And I think that the lesson that you can take from it is the real strength of spirit of the community to work together. And it was a fantastic example where you had some residents had business skills, some residents had actual trade skills, and they were all helping each other out and for the greater community. And I think if we could bottle that, I think we'd all live in a much better place. And just to your point, sir, about building units, I would metaphorically, of course, rap any of my team on the knuckles for referring to units and not referring to homes, because what we build is homes. And I think there is a big, big difference. And as I said in my opening remarks, housing associations care about the long term, we care about the communities, and we really do want to work with the community. So back to the direct question, it is definitely about engaging with local communities at the earliest opportunity, understanding what their needs are, not imposing our own thoughts and what we think they want and what they need, but actually really taking the time to understand, because every community has different requirements and different needs. So that's definitely the top tip, finding that time to create that conversation.
Thank you. And yes, we'll go to the gentleman in the middle here.
Thanks. Richard Clare, Leader, Wiltshire Council. I cannot overstate the importance, in my view, of social rent housing in the sustainability, the functionality of my villages and small market towns. However, I've now got a number of housing associations, not Guinness, we had a conversation earlier, Kevin, not Guinness, who are behaving in a way that is no longer social. They're no longer being good social landlords. Some of the rent increases have been, particularly for sheltered housing, have been appalling. Yeah. Some of the behaviour around the maintenance of stock is pathetic. I won't name them here, but look it up online, do a Google search, Wiltshire social housing. Well, okay, if you were to do a Google search and look for news reports, you would find that Stone, Mortar and Green Square in particular have really been slated recently. They are not behaving as social landlords. To make it worse, they, along with Astor, to name another, are selling social rent housing in villages and rebuilding it in the nearest large town, which is eroding their purpose. You haven't mentioned council housing yet. We're building council housing as fast as we can because it's the only way I can protect it. What can you do to bring these RPs who are no longer social landlords and are becoming developers under control and remind them of their purpose?
Thank you very much. We'll come to the Minister in just a moment, but first, CJ, might I ask you, what does excellence look like when working with a housing association and housing provider to strengthen the local community and offer really good quality of service and support?
I think small grassroots organisations often have their backgrounds in the very communities where they work. So with Guinness, when a housing association is in an area and knows their community, to partner up with small organisations who have their roots in that area, you're going to have the best outcome. And I think, small charities have less bureaucracy, less hierarchy. They're more efficient, quicker decision making, and I think a lot more can be achieved a lot quicker.
Thank you very much. Minister McLean, would you like to?
Yeah, on the wrong uns, yeah, there are some wrong uns, and and you're right, and that's why some of the legislation we brought in the space, especially on the back of the Rochdale tragedy, outrageous state of affairs, should never have existed. It's clear that, obviously, of course, like any sector, you've got very good organisations, and I'm sure Guinness are one of them, and many others, but you've also got bad ones. So you do need to regulate, you do need to legislate. A lot of that is starting to happen. I think most of the good people in the sector have welcomed it, because it's like any sector. If you've got regulation, people can demonstrate that they are doing the right thing, and it drives up the standards across the board. Of course, it also comes with funding challenges, because they're going to argue in turn that, well, look, we can't afford it, and all the rest of it, and but this is what we have to deal with in government. We're saying you need to do these things now. You need to make your properties decent. You need to provide a complaint process. You need to not ignore people when they're telling you there's damp and mould in their flat. And they turn around and say, oh, well, you're asking us to keep the rents down because of the cost of living crisis. And there's a lot of different things that have to be thrown into the mix. So we have to look at it in the round. We have to make sure that we've got these people who are running these organisations. They say that they're purpose-driven. A lot of them are. But when they're not, we need to hold them to account, make them change their ways. We need to bring in proper enforcement with teeth, so that tenants often, because these are the people that are not going to complain. They're not going to complain, and even if they do, they're ignored. And we've seen that. And they're not the people that can take up pitchforks or write to their MP or do any of that. And that's why, tragically, we've seen some of the really appalling situations that we have. And that is when the government needs to act, and we have acted.
Thank you. We've been over on this side a fair few times. Would anyone on this side like to ask a question? Yes, and then we'll head to the back as well. We'll take two together.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Aziz. I'm the newly elected councillor from Luton. So I have from my experience, I also sit few committees in the Luton Council. And what I understand from the officer, the saying is developer, they are more keen to build 1 and 2 bedroom house, not for 3 and 4 bedroom. And especially Luton and some where lots of Asian communities are, there are some bigger families, so there's a big shortage of 3 and 4 bedroom properties, but developer are, on the commercial perspective, they are very reluctant. And council also sometimes they don't have a much room on the negotiation, because developer are, they make lots of politics. They're saying, oh, because the land value is not good, but impossible, Luton house prices double, triple. Now I'm a 2 bedroom owner, I can't afford 3 bedroom. But this developer, they always say, oh no, because the land value is less, so it's not worth it for us to make 3 bedroom house. So because in Luton there's a lots of 1 and 2 bedroom flats. It's attracting working people from London to relocate, but the families, they are suffering, and this is very unfair. And we need some sort of rules and regulation. The developer, they should make some proportion of 3 and 4 bedroom house. No if, no but. Otherwise, they have to. And also there was a lack of community housing, because I work with healthcare and I have some GPs. They're asking, they don't have any facility to expand their surgery. And council, they don't have any extra fund to make some community, to develop the community center or some other communities place.
Thank you very much.
Because they don't have enough funds. My request is extra funding for community housing, e.g. like GPs and funding to renovation the community center. Because my next door community center got closed because council, they don't have a fund where they make a 15 new build properties, but no community center.
Thank you very much. We'll bear those in mind for just a minute. Family and community housing. And then there was a question just at the back here as well. Yes?
Two of us. Perhaps just taking it back up a level, it's been brilliant to hear in the housing sessions today how much consensus around housing is a really key infrastructure, housing is a social justice issue, housing is the centre for everything, the problem and the solution. given that, and given the call Liam made, I think, really passionately for housing as a cross-party issue, both in terms of sort of legacy of the problems we've got and how we move forward, recognising the politics of it, and perhaps giving the Minister here a little a promotion in my question, but do you think housing really should be a cabinet position rather than I don't mean to say just by belittling it, but a ministerial role as it is? Do you think it really should have a seat round the table so it can be taken forward with the resources and perhaps the sort of additional kind of power to the elbow that might come with that?
Great, thank you very much. Perhaps Liam, would you like to just speak to that?
Yes,
first?
one of the recommendations I made in my book, you should have a Secretary of State for Housing, full stop.
Yep.
There was a Secretary of State for Housing, Communities, blah, blah, blah. Now there's a Secretary of State for Levelling Up and Housing and blah, blah, blah. So it's already been demoted, if you like. The party that solves or grapples with and begins to address the housing crisis will win a lot of elections and will deserve to. I'd like to pay tribute to, I'd like to say what an amazing story your story is, as that before. I'd like to pay tribute to Carl and remind him that if you get a phone call in the middle of a public moment, do what Michael Heseltine did on Question Time, do you remember? And he actually answered the phone when he was on Question Time. And like the whole nation, well, it wasn't the whole nation because it's the BBC, so very few. Millions of people were watching. He literally took a phone call in the middle of a question directed to him. Unbelievable, unbelievable.
Love that.
But I absolutely agree with the Minister on community land trusts and what you're doing. More power to your elbow. Maybe we can find a way to promote, you're running a campaign to get this thing in the autumn statement.
Yeah.
You might want to talk off the record to a journalist and
Maybe I will do that.
I can't think of any.
Neither can I.
No, it is a really important issue. And the gentleman here made an important point. In my research and dealings across the housing industry, I was amazed to find how many housing associations are behaving badly. I thought they were sort of cuddly, herbivorous organisations. Quite a lot of them have charitable status, which comes with enormous privileges and enormous responsibilities. And I found housing associations where the people running them basically thought they were running a hedge fund. I mean, they're out of control. And rather than legislation, with all respect, the legislation is already there. Enforce it, Pick the one you really don't like and do them in, right? No, just use the law to strip them of their status, of their privilege of being a housing association, with all the benefits that come from that, but the responsibilities that come with that. This is the third sector. The UK is meant to be really good at third sector stuff. Walk around in Manchester and just look up above the sort of chicken shop facades at all the credit unions, the cooperatives. We're really good at this stuff in the UK. And a lot of, often blokes in red braces sitting in provincial towns think they're Gordon Gekko because they're running a housing association. We have to make examples of some of them, so the work of the likes of Guinness, the likes of Grand Union, who I filmed with the other day in Bedfordshire, doing some fantastic work, Aileen Byrne there, a massive advocate for social housing. We don't want to sully what these guys are doing because there are a few bad apples. We have to make examples of some, enforcing the existing regulations and legislation, and then you will see the behaviour change.
Thanks, Liam.
Yeah.
Thank you, Liam. And finally, for some closing remarks, we'll come to Minister, soon to be Secretary of State. Timothy.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you've got Rishi Sunak on speed dial and you can ring him up and...
I'm just going to WhatsApp him, actually.
Yeah, go on. It's actually funny because people have said that. First of all, they've asked me about, are you the 15th Housing Minister? And yes, I am. But what I would like to say about that is I am not... I am the longest serving housing minister since Kit Malthouse.
Yeah.
So there you go. So I'm not the shortest serving housing minister anymore, so I'm cracking on with a whole load of stuff. Can I just come back on one point? Because I think Liam made a really important point earlier on. This sometimes gets lost a bit in the complexity of our system about the sort of land value uplift issue. And we have thought a lot about this, working with Liam and many, many other people who are way cleverer than me. And we are determined to find a way to do this. because we know that there's value left on the table. And you know, we've legislated for it. We're looking at the infrastructure levy solution. I know people have got all sorts of views on that, but fundamentally we agree that we need to be able to get that money for it to go to the local authority and for it to be spent in the area on things like GP surgery, which I think is what you, sir, were saying. And obviously the politics of Luton I don't pretend to understand for 1 second, but congratulations on your election. Definitely keep making the case and make sure that your city council, your Luton council is actually listening to the people and making sure they're building the houses that are needed. If it's family houses that are needed that your voters want, go to the planning committee and make the case and make sure that they are delivering through the funds that they do have through 106 and others, the infrastructure that's needed, etc. So that is all for your local council. But can I just sort of thank everybody for all the stimulating discussion? I think it's such an important electoral issue, and I'm really I feel very privileged for doing the role and learning so much about it, and I want to thank everybody for all the support that you've given me. Challenge, criticism, but also some support. So thank you very much for all of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLean. And I know you have a very full schedule and off to the next thing, but the CSJ has wine at the back. You're very welcome to stick around for a drink and continue the conversation. Shall we show our appreciation for the panel?
I do need to shoot.